we are joined by Martine Robbins, a familiar face at our networking meetings. Martine is an HR expert and director at HR department, offering support and advice mainly to SMEs in and around Woking. She has worked in a variety of business sectors, including engineering, manufacturing, technology, and professional services. Martine is also an associate growth champion at Enterprise N3. So without further ado, Martine is going to give us a short introduction, and then she'll answer some questions and provide practical guidance to you and answer your concerns. So Martine, welcome. And if you would like to share your screen then with us.
Thank you very much, and good morning everybody, and I will share some slides with you now. One moment. Can somebody just enable the screen sharing, please? That'd be great, thanks. Brilliant, thank you very much. Sometimes it takes a little while to get onto. There we go. Okay, so good morning everybody. I'm just going to take a few minutes to talk through some practical guidance on what to think about in getting businesses back on track and trying to get back to what we're all talking about as being our new normal. And of course, when we're employing people, that can be challenging at the best of times, but really want to give you some insight into things to think about as part of that preparation for bringing people back to work and hopefully helping businesses get back on track. First of all, it's thinking about getting prepared. And as we all know, the devil's in the detail and often around planning. So we need to be looking at what we're doing from a business perspective and obviously thinking about how that impacts on our employees and our workplace. Also, it's thinking about communication. Hopefully during the last 3 months, if you have had people away from work, either on furlough or otherwise, there's been regular two-way communication. So you've kept that interaction going, and it could be on an informal or formal basis. But the key thing is to make sure that you actually understand exactly how your employees are feeling and also what the concerns may be. And they could be work-related or perhaps not. In terms of trying to help them come back to work. And of course you have to take account of that, because when you're thinking about workplace planning and bringing people back from such a huge event that we've been dealing with, you need to understand what the impact that's going to have. So if you have somebody that's got caring responsibilities, homeschooling, you have to sort of factor that into consideration. So some of these concerns that individuals will have will be about that whole thing about going back into the workplace, having been out for weeks and months, and as well as perhaps an overlay of other sort of concerns around financial issues, worries, as say, you know, caring responsibilities, and all the other things that people are obviously trying to factor in and make work at the moment. So things to sort of think about, you'll probably already be aware of the fact that we've got flexible furlough that will come into play from the 1st of July. And what I would ask you to think about is, will this help your business? And again, when you're trying to plan to bring people back to your organisation, have you got employees that are clinically vulnerable, for example? So flexible furlough could be an option to think about there. As I've mentioned, childcare challenges, you know, you may still have issues around people that are trying to juggle all of that and want to get back to work. So how can you try to make it all come together in a less stressful way than has probably already been the case? And that could still mean partially furloughing somebody or possibly unpaid parental or dependence leave. You may come across people that have got, you know, some medical conditions, and some of that could be around employee well-being. Again, need to understand what the implications are. We won't get into too much of the technical detail, but it is a protected characteristic. So think about, again, flexible furlough. Could that be an option for you? Or possibly paid sick leave or possibly unpaid leave, depending on the circumstances. So there's no one size fits all. It really has to come down to the circumstances that we're talking about. The elephant in the room is about getting people back to work and the issues of trying to do that in a way that hopefully gets you back on track with your productivity, but also you want to bring people back with the right mindset as well. Already we're seeing lots of anxiety and well-being concerns being reported, and this is actually having a massive impact on the businesses trying to actually bring people back. We can all understand why people have had time off up until today, you know, reasonable weather, possibly on full pay, and so thinking about returning to work now is starting to perhaps, you know, become a reality, and could be an issue. So if you have people that potentially were disengaged before lockdown, does this just reinforce that feeling of disengagement from an individual perspective? Or you may have got people that have developed it as part of just being out of contact with many people during lockdown. What you also need to be prepared for is bringing people back into work if they are not in the right mindset could be a cause of friction. So that could be amongst colleagues, and I'm already starting to see where you've perhaps had businesses where some people have been furloughed, some people haven't, and of course you're bringing those individuals back together, and it's starting to become a source of friction. Or again, between a manager and an employee, a simple sort of request to do something all of a sudden becomes a massive issue, and starts to get blown out of proportion. So if you're seeing this sort of friction, or you anticipate this may happen, please make sure that you do manage it rather than ignore it, because it could lead to more serious consequences such as grievances and other things, which again, we won't go into now, but can be serious. And also health and safety concerns. For many people, it is around trying to understand you know, the health and safety precautions that businesses are taking. And as we're all aware, the government has issued extensive guidelines depending on which industry you're operating in, that's hopefully helping you to plan how to bring people back in. So that is understanding and doing risk assessments. That could be scoping out and mapping out, you know, 2 meters sort of distancing, the desks moved, all that sort of thing. Okay, so really need to sort of think about how you are trying to show that you're doing all those things and keeping on the right side of health and safety concerns that individuals may have. So what does this mean for all of your business? Well, lots of change, as we all know, and not everybody likes change, but unfortunately we have no choice in the matter at the moment. We're starting to see a slow return to what people are referring to as the new normal, and for some people they will try to embrace it, for others it will be a real challenge. Businesses are starting to pivot and sometimes consider diversifying into new areas. So is this something that you're starting to think about for your business? If so, what does it mean in terms of the employees that you've got working for you at the moment? Redundancies, you can't ignore it. You know, it may be a question of you're looking at that situation now, you may be planning for the next 3 to 6 months in terms of, you know, cash flow, income, and having to make perhaps those hard decisions around cutting back on your cost base. So start to sort of think about what you need to do for that. Suffice to say, the normal employment guidelines around redundancies are still very much in force. We still have to make sure process is followed there, and not surprisingly, there will be lots of potential employment tribunal claims because businesses won't be doing that. So please make sure you keep an eye on that. And as I've already mentioned, you may have already had people furloughed, you may want to refurlough, you may want to sort of do that on a flexible basis and do it on a part-time arrangement. Again, just to sort of try to help your business move back to working to the new normal. You may also have to think about voluntary pay cuts, hours, you know, being reduced, and possibly unpaid leave as well. It's not going to necessarily be a clear path going forward as businesses try to get income back up to what it should be, and obviously have that sort of ability to pay for resources, and whether that's people, whether that's accommodation, you know, all the things that we know and love as being business owners. So you may need to think about some of those options for your business as well going forward. But I think also it's more important to sort of think about where your business is now, and how you need to sort of move it forward, and what that is going to look like. Are you starting to think about office space? You know, some businesses are already thinking about, you know, it's been quite easy, dare I say, to work from home for some businesses. So they're starting to rethink about, you know, their need for office space. It may not be completely going away from having an office, but it could be scaling down. So is that something that you're thinking about? That then can feed into, you know, a whole working from home sort of approach, flexible working, potentially sort of shifts, rotas, lots of different ways of working. But again, you need to explore what that means in terms of not just legally, but from a best practice point of view, but most importantly, how you can see that working in your organisation. Also making sure that you understand, you know, how best to employ people going forward. And if you are looking at changing the way you currently employ people, please make sure that you capture it formally. We're already starting to see employment tribunals, even in a pared down situation at the moment, are starting to get claims coming through because businesses are starting to try to cut corners where this is concerned. So please don't add yourself to those statistics and think about what you need to do to capture that. Again, if you do have people working from home, you know, as managers and business owners, do you know how to manage them remotely? It's not the same as obviously physically having people in that same space as you. It does need a different skill set. So think about what you need to do to make that work if that is something that you're looking at. And of course, as we perhaps have already seen, having that extra investment in technology may be required to help you be more effective if you are looking to have people working from home and in a different arrangement. And also think about the mindset. Not everybody can work from home because they're just not built that way. So again, this is important, coming back to understanding the people that work for you, if you're considering that, whether they are of the right mindset to be productive, and what can you do to help them perhaps transition to that. So just to sort of summarise, we've already seen quite a lot of legislation changes under Coronavirus Act 2020. This has had impacts on how people are employed, and you know, potentially there will be more to come from that as we start to sort of move forward. Communication, please make sure that you're trying to keep everybody as up to date as much as you can, because nobody was ever accused of over communicating. We're always accused of perhaps under communicating. And again, I think it's always come back to the mantra of we are all in this together. So again, sort of see it as a real team effort to try to keep everyone appraised of what's going on, but also buying into the new changes that you may be considering going forward. Have that awareness of mental well-being. Think about what the signs may be with certain individuals, perhaps help signpost some resources that they may need to tap into if you think somebody may be struggling. Think around the issues of bringing people back to work. If they've been on furlough leave, as I've mentioned, it's about the friction, it's about trying to get people back into a way of working, bearing in mind that they have been out of the business for weeks and months, and that can have its toll, shall we say, on individuals. Think about your business plan. It's more about short and medium term, I think, at the moment, rather than the longer term, and obviously aligned to that. Make sure you know your numbers, and you know, we're probably all on various iterations of our plans at the moment, but again, you know, we can't lose sight of how important that is. And if you are thinking about diversifying your business, you know, what do you need to do to help your business move in that new direction? And does that mean retraining employees? Does it mean actually bringing new people in? Lots of things there to consider. But I think more important, just try to articulate in your plan what you think your new normal is going to be. And that's me done in a nutshell.
Thank you very much, Martine, for sharing your knowledge with us. I'm sure there's some real practical tips that everyone has picked up. I've got a few questions here for you that that was submitted. The first one was from Jeremy. Do employers need to provide masks in the workplace? Okay,
so in terms of, just to answer your question, Jeremy, it depends on obviously the sector that they're working in. The obviously ones are, you know, public health, care sectors. You may have got a legal requirement to make sure that people have got PPE, just because that's part of the government guidelines under health and safety rules at the moment. If you don't fall into those categories, then you have to sort of look at the situation where employees have to take some responsibility for making sure that they are, if they are relying on public transport or they're in spaces with lots of people, that they're also taking some responsibility for their own protection as well.
Does that answer your question, Jeremy?
Hi, Martine. Thank you very much. So that's kind of interesting. So if this doesn't apply to me, I don't employ people currently. Just to be quite clear, I provide masks. We sourced a load of masks cheaply directly from a factory because we could see the need for them, and there seemed to be a shortage. And I'm selling them at a very low margin. If anybody's interested, sorry for the plug, but really we're not going to make a lot of money, but we are hoping to provide a service. What I was kind of interested in also was, where does the responsibility lie if you're requiring people to come to the office? Do you therefore have an obligation to provide them with masks to get them to the office, or is that still the individual's responsibility?
The individual's responsibility, because at the end of the day, as an employer, you're really responsible for, what goes on, say, within those four walls when that person does turn up, and obviously making sure that you're following health and safety guidelines. The thing is if you try to take a step back, as an employer, you don't know what that person could be doing between leaving home and coming to your place of work. So, they could be, being quite sort of, silly in terms of putting themselves in risky situations that they don't need to. And then obviously as the employer, you end up dealing with the fallout of that. So I think it's important that people understand that they have a responsibility. Certainly, I've been issuing guidance to some businesses to sort of help them communicate that message about, giving some thoughts to people within organisations about guiding their thinking and trying to be responsible. Because obviously, if there is an impact on the workplace, as we all know, if they end up, catching coronavirus, they will have to sort of self-isolate. But there could be an impact on the organisation, affecting other people, closing down premises. So we have to have some sort of lines drawn in terms of what comes under employer responsibilities versus employee.
Okay, so but basically, once they're at work, I've got the employer's got some responsibility, but until they walk through the office door, how they get there and what protection they take, that's up to them. Okay, exactly. That's a very helpful clarification. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin.
Can I just say something on that point, because I did actually read an article about exactly that point, whether employer has a responsibility for the employee coming into the office. And I actually read an article which actually clearly stated that the employer cannot expect the employee to arrive unless the employee can arrive safely. And the meaning of that, which was clarified further down, was that if the employee needed to use public transport and felt unsafe to do so, it becomes the employer's responsibility to get that employee to the office or the workplace at his possible cost. And the indication there was, as an example, by the use of taxi.
I think, again, it comes back to having a risk assessment of the situation. So, again, as part of the health and safety guidelines, all employers would have to assess the risks around their employee workforce and understanding who's likely to be travelling in on public transport, who's going to be using their own transport, and obviously making a call accordingly. As I say, it's a very grey area in some respects, because you want people to be responsible, but because we don't understand in terms of, how the virus really works, other than obviously the fallout, what we see is the fact that if you've got somebody that's acting irresponsibly, and again, we can probably all have a view about what that can be, we have to sort of try to take, I think, control of what the employer is responsible for. So if they are responsible for trying to help a person get in and they have to use public transport, then they could do a risk assessment accordingly. But typically, if people are coming to work under their own steam, then it would be down to them to make sure that they are protected in whatever way they felt most comfortable.
Yeah, as always comes down to the having to do risk analysis.
Yes, yeah, it does, and it can be quite hard because from the outset people are thinking, well, surely the employer has to pick up the tab for everything, but not necessarily. So I think, again, if you're following the guidelines, you're doing a risk assessment, and you're very clear in terms of where those responsibilities lie, then hopefully it will guide a way forward. But you still need both parties, the employer and the employee, to behave, accordingly.
Yeah, thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Martine and Howard. A couple of questions from Simon. The first one, Martine, is I don't have any formal employees but use freelancers. They have been claiming self-employed support during the lockdown. We are now restarting and I pick up some stress in their behavior returning to work. What responsibilities do I have to freelancers to accommodate their transition back to work?
Okay. Well, with freelancers, anybody self-employed, you should have a self-employed agreement. So for those that aren't aware, self-employed people are not employees, okay, in the traditional sense. However, when you are working with them, and what we're looking at in this bigger situation now from a health and safety point of view, you do have a responsibility for anybody that will be coming onto your premises. So whether they are PAYE employees, whether they are contractors, whether they are suppliers, you name it. So in that sort of situation, I would suggest that you look at, again, understanding what the employee is dealing with at the moment and having those sort of conversations, making sure trying to be all things to all people. It's a little bit different with freelancers because you are undertaking an exchange of work for money. So it's a supply of services. So from your perspective, you wouldn't have the same responsibility that you'd have as an employer for a PAYE employee. But I think because of just what we're dealing with at the moment, there is that sort of moral and ethical responsibility to understand if people are struggling, how you can help them. But that really is as much as it goes.
Thank you, Martine. Another question, schools are not yet back, except for your reception 1 and 6 and key workers. I have employees with children in years not back at school. What allowance do I have to make for this, as I really need them back at work? They maintain there is no childcare available to them. Do I have to give them time off, and will it be paid?
Okay, well, as I sort of alluded to in the notes, depending on the situation there, it can be obviously quite a difficult scenario for all concerned, but also more importantly, from an employer's point of view, you have to make sure that you're not seen to be treating them differently because they do have those childcare responsibilities. So it is, again, assessing the situation in terms of, is furlough still an option, or from the 1st of July, could you consider part furlough to help bring the person back? If you've got somebody that really is struggling with childcare, then the only other options will be, apart from furlough, could be, say, unpaid parental or dependence leave. And that's really, your options, unless you want to sort of find other ways of trying to get them to come back to work. But typically those are the options that we're seeing at the moment. But it's trying to understand how long that's going to take. And of course, if we're talking September maybe, before many children will be back at school, could be longer, then from a business point of view, again, you need to assess what that's going to be for you in terms of the skills, the challenges that you've got with somebody either continuing on furlough leave, either fully or part-time. And if you can't make that work, then think about, say, parental leave.
I think that, thank you, Martine. I think that sort of leads into a question I asked you earlier. If in future working arrangements change, do I need to change the employee contracts if and where necessary? And also you mentioned the Good Work Plan that was issued in April 2020. If you can just touch on that as well.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, you're right. I mean, any changes that are coming out of, again, trying to get businesses back to work and looking at different ways of working, fundamentally it will be a variation on the individual's employment contract. So you need to have that discussion. Some ways you may have to sort of have consultation around some of the changes as well. It really depends on the nature of what you're wanting to change to. So you need to consult, you need to change these documents formally and try to make sure that you can understand what that's going to mean for you and obviously for the individual going forward. It's a lot of the legislation, has come out very quickly under Coronavirus Act, so we've got to factor that in, and I think some will probably continue to come out. With the Good Work Plan, that sort of got buried because it was the 1st of April when that came out. But that talks to, again, bringing people into the organisation. Typically, you'd have up to 8 weeks to issue the employment contract, whereas under the Good Work Plan now, you have to issue the employment contract from the outset. And so, in some ways, I think it's a better way of working. I've always worked that way. I think it sends out a better message to either new people coming on board, and it's less admin. So I don't think that's a major sort of showstopper. But it also talks to having changes around sick leave and holiday, which again has sort of got buried under the Coronavirus Act, because certainly for holiday, we've now got the legislation under that says, for this year, anybody that's had their holiday affected by coronavirus, which is probably everybody on the planet, we need to sort of try to give people time to sort of take it and not lose it necessarily. So there is this 2-year window potentially. And so this is hopefully going to help employees plan their holidays more effectively, but also importantly for employers not to be bombarded with holiday requests and then they find their productivity is taking a hit again. I'm already starting to see issues around holiday bubbling up because businesses are seeing people accruing lots of holiday and of course potentially not using it. So as business owners, if you find yourself in that situation, you can ask people to take holiday whilst they're on furlough. And again, there's a process around that. But I would suggest trying to keep an eye on it so you don't feel that you are then in a situation where you've got lots of holiday that needs to be taken and it could have a detrimental effect on your productivity going forward.
Yeah, I actually saw that as a big potential issue coming up for me. Because my company annual year starts from January.
Yeah.
And some of the guys hadn't taken their holiday time because they planned it to be later on in the year. And of course that hasn't happened because obviously with the situation as is, which meant that 6 months in, you want me to start my video? Okay, here we go. Here we go, that's me. So as a consequence of that, of course, what that means is that the holiday can accrue. So in other words, 6 months worth of holiday would have accrued, which they can take in the second 6 months, which will then be disastrous for my business for getting them back. So we consulted with our solicitor, and what they say is you can actually instruct them to take the holiday time or a certain percentage of the holiday time during the furlough period. And we did exactly that. So we informed them that we require you to take half the annual requirement during your furlough period. And we've implemented that. Nobody's queried it, questioned it, or whatever else, and they've all accepted it. And that's what we've done for our own protection.
Yeah, and that's exactly the way to do it. Yeah, again, I've been working with businesses along the same lines to sort of help them manage it so it's not a huge problem further down the line, as you say, particularly if you've got certain times in the year that are going to be busy anyway, never mind what we did. It's trying to sort of help businesses try to manage it, but still sort of recognise that we want people to be taking time off, but we don't want to be bombarded with a huge number of requests when things do get back to whatever is that new normal, and you find that all that good work and planning around productivity then gets severely disrupted once again.
Yes, indeed. The only other thing, of course, to point out on that fact is the fact that whilst they're on furlough, during the time that they're taking holiday, you're obliged to pay 100% of the salary.
Yes, yeah, that's exactly the situation. So, and that's that's the trade-off in terms of that has to be the case because again, it's fundamental in that person's contract. So, so that's the reason why that has to happen.
Yeah, it's worked out in our case. So that was planning, which is something which I wasn't advised. Nobody advised me on that. So it's just I started to think, well, actually, when they all come back, they're going to be due an awful lot of time, and it's going to shut my business.
Yeah, yeah. No, a lot of people are starting to do the same thing at the moment. I think just because it's June, particularly as you say, if you've got a start holiday of year of January, it's going to sort of get to become a real problem. So yeah, I've got a lot of businesses that are doing the same thing at the moment. So and it'll carry on being that way for a while.
Thank you for sharing that, Howard. It's good practice that we also share with one another, and that way we learn how to deal with the situations that we obviously being confronted with at the moment. Thank you very much, Martine, and everyone who participated this morning. As a reminder, I'd like you to have a look at the Woking Works website again. We've updated the homepage. There's lots of information on there and links to the government guidelines. There's also a special offer section where all local businesses can put up some offers. And also just a reminder that next week we have another webinar on the 25th of June at 11 o'clock. And the topic is how resilient is your business, where we will be joined by Andrew Douthwaite of Hamlins, Mark Christie from NatWest, and Ian Martin from the Growth Hub at Enterprise M3. So just again, thank you very much, Martine, and everyone else who joined us this morning. And we're looking forward to seeing you at one of our next webinars.